And now to introduce today's distinguished Vice Admiral, please welcome Charlie Dickey.
Thank you, Bill. A couple of years ago, I was having dinner with an old friend of mine from college and Navy days, and I told him about our Rotary Club, and he described his role at NOAA, and he marveled about its boss. My good friend had seen many in his 35 years as a Navy SEAL and as an executive in and out of state and federal government. But I had never heard him extol about one quite like this one. He allowed simply that this was the brightest person for whom he had ever worked, and Seattle Rotary should meet him. For over half a century, since his first day at the U.S. Naval Academy to now, Vice Admiral Connie Lautenbacher has had both his feet planted squarely in the oceans. In the Navy, he commanded strike ships, naval stations, flotillas, and fleets. Once heading 3rd Fleet, the one that encompasses the Navy's presence in our West Coast. He was commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command in Riyadh during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. He served in the Office of Chief of Naval Operations in many capacities, including his final naval post as Deputy CNO for Programs and Budget. He's lectured at all the military war colleges. He's been a Federal Executive Fellow and has served at the Brookings Institute. Now at the end of his name, as you'll see, is a parenthetical lowercase abbreviation suggesting that he's retired. It should read instead, extremely active. When he closed out a distinguished naval career 7 years ago, sea duty quickly morphed to ocean duty. In 2001, President Bush appointed Admiral Lautenbacher to head the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Its many operations include the National Weather Service. Yes, you can blame someone else besides Fox 10 News if you don't like the atmospherics outside. 13. I did say 13. That's a hard number to say. 13. It's also included in its operations are the National Ocean Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the National Hurricane Center. In his role as NOAA administrator, he headed several U.S. delegations to world summits and symposiums on oceans and atmosphere. But probably no one more critical to him than the first Ocean Summit 4 years ago, in which he persuaded 55 nations to close ranks and share data observations from all their global gathering points. You will probably hear something more about this in a minute. I don't know whether you need an MS or a PhD degree in applied mathematics to do his work, but I'm sure it helps that Harvard awarded him both. No surprise that his wife, Susan, shares a love of science and is a lifelong high school teacher in the subject. What a pleasure it is, and I might add a personal privilege, to introduce to you our Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and our NOAA Administrator, Admiral Connie Lautenbacher.
He doesn't trust me with the computer, so it'll be just a minute. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a great privilege and a pleasure to be with you today. I have been here before, I want to say, and I want to spend just a minute thanking the Rotary Club, particularly this group, for the work that they do. The first time I seriously came to Seattle is the first, I guess, week that I was a flag officer, and I was touring some of the major installations on the West Coast, and the first one I came to was Seattle, And on the first day that I was here, the head of the Navy here brought me to the Rotary Club. You need to be here. This is the place where it's happening. This is the base of Seattle. These are the people who do the good things, who make things work properly, and who band together in a fashion that serves their fellow man, fellow women, for that matter, completely with open hearts, service, and a welcoming attitude. So I thank you for the work that you do, and it's a pleasure to be back in this capacity to talk to this group. There's some very distinguished citizens here and people who have done a lot more than I've ever done, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to bend your ear for a minute. I'm going to talk to you about just one particular thing. NOAA is a large organization in a sense because it covers a lot, but it's actually sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of federal agencies, okay? Now, I know the age of this audience because some places I go, they don't know who Rodney Dangerfield is. So it's, you know, it's small and sometimes not respected, but it plays an enormous role in the society. What NOAA does affects about a third of the GDP every day. The environmental information that comes provides the baseline for commerce. And you see up on this slide, before I move it, the Secretary of the Commerce is labeled there. NOAA is actually 65% of the Department of Commerce. So it's not an independent agency like NASA or like the National Science Foundation or whatever. It's part of commerce, and it's an important part of commerce. But I'm going to talk to you about observing our Earth and why it's important and what we're doing these days. And that's kind of the menu. The slides are not the most important part of this, but I want to talk about the global picture, and I want to talk to you about why it's important locally and the issues that come up. And you can, as you're scanning that, can see that some of them are pretty important for Puget Sound and the environment and our ability to maintain a sustainable lifestyle here. So that's the menu. All right. Now, why Earth observations? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, when you talk about the word observation, it's the basis of science. Without observation, there is no science. You have to have data. You have to have good data. You have to have reliable data. You have to have data that people trust. You have to be able to share it in a way that people can verify it. So observations, that's a nice word because it doesn't have a political context. It's something that you can all agree on before you start on debating what the policy is. Let's have some information and real data before we start debating what we ought to do about it and turn it into a political football. So, and the other, so politically it's a good idea. Scientifically it's a good idea, and it's needed. If you look at that cartoon picture there, you see basically an Earth that's wired. We give ourselves EKGs and all sorts of diagnostic tests in a human sense to figure out what's going on. Why can't we do that with the Earth, and why can't we make that information available so that we can be all talking from the same basis, whether we live in Europe or whether we live in Mexico or United States or whatever. So it's important to understand what's going on the Earth in total. Things are connected. The atmosphere, right now we're watching the sand from the Gobi Desert fly over Seattle, and it'll go to New York and it'll pollute the area, and all the outputs, emissions from the power plants in the Midwest end up over New England and then end up over Europe, and it keeps circling around. The ocean's the same thing. The contaminants that come out of the Mississippi River end up being tested in Iceland positively as the Gulf Stream flows by across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. So there's connectivity for the Earth. It doesn't know any political boundaries when it comes to managing the systems of the Earth. And you can see, if you talk about observations, prevention, more than 90% of national disaster-related deaths occur in developing countries because they don't have access to information. The developed countries are the ones that have created the satellite systems, the observing systems, and can deal with many of the problems that we take for granted. We just take the information that you get from the weather reports on TV for granted. And in Congress, somebody said, well, you know, why do we need the Weather Service? We can just turn on the Weather Channel and get all that information. And you can watch Channel 4 and get all that information. 13. Watch 13. I thought we were against 13. whatever the right number is here, please consider it. But the other thing, too, is that there's certain, you need to have a baseline for how you form society. Now, I went to the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg at the beginning of, it was actually in 2002. One of the most fascinating periods of endorsements for this kind of concept happened at a meeting that it went for 3.5 hours, and one after another of African countries and African, what I would call county managers, got up and talked about a project which Europe and the United States had done to provide satellite information as well as ground truth information on water tables and desertification and lots of geographic information. They got up and said, this is the kind of thing we need. Otherwise, we don't know what we're doing. How do we know where to put our roads? How do we know where to drill a well? How do we know what crops to plant and when? How are we going to manage our economy? So you can give away all the foreign aid you want. You can bring people into their home and you can treat them nicely. But if they don't have access to basic information, they can't make decisions that allow them to lift those economies out of the difficulty that they're in. And the money goes to some Swiss bank account. But if you have basic information on what the environment is providing you, that's what makes a developed nation different from a developing nation. So why not create this for the world? Why not have the sharing of the information to allow us at least one piece of bringing the world to a state of economic development and standard of living that I think we would like to see as people in the United States who enjoy an extremely high standard of living. We'd like to see this. So this issue is extremely important, and the last point there is something we make. I've made that point in the Navy, and I make it in NOAA, is that oceans are important. We all live along the coast of our oceans. 50% of the world's populations could go to 75% by 2020, and we have over 6 billion people on the planet now, rising to 7 billion people. We are a round-off error in that in the United States. We are 0.3 of that. This is a round-off error we're talking about. 6 billion people are out there using these resources. And we have the best air, we have the best water, we have really the best environmental protection of any other nation in the world. Why not try to use that in a way so as the rest of the world comes along, it's going to do it in the right way for sustainability. Anyway, so that's kind of the thought that went on this. So you mentioned in the introduction that we have now a group called GEO. It's a global Earth, well, the system, as you see up there, Global Earth Observation System of Systems, or GEOS, and it's called the Group on Earth Observations. The 70th nation just joined the other day. They have a small secretariat in Geneva where there are a number of UN organizations. This is not a UN organization, but it is a playing field for people to come together to create this wiring of the world and providing information as a baseline for us to build a sustainable society and provide some of the benefits that we have today to people to allow them to begin to have the advantages of everything we have for quality of life. There are 46 international organizations. That means 46 UN organizations. So everybody that needs information in the UN shows up too in this playing field. FAO, UNESCO, the IOC, the World Meteorological Organization, which is an example of building the kind of information you need. So you can see the marvelous things you can do with this, and it's something that's a win-win situation because the U.S. cannot observe the world's environment. Each nation has to come to the table with their environment and hook it up to the system. And what do they get back? They get back the information from everybody else so that they can produce the same kinds of economically and socially beneficial decisions for their society that we do and we take for granted every day, whether we watch the Weather Channel or, what is it, Channel 13? 13. I'll make sure I'm going to use that for you. And the other thing, now, those of us who are scientists love what you see on the, I guess, your right-hand side called observations. These are all the nice toys that we have. Many of them are created here in Seattle. That Dark 2 buoy, which we've now put in the water off the coast of Thailand, hopefully will prevent the lack of warning that we had with that tsunami that occurred in the Indian Ocean over 2 years ago and killed 200,000 to 300,000 people, depending on how your count goes. That buoy is now sitting in the water in the Indian Ocean, ready for action. We've put now up to 29 new buoys protecting the Pacific Ocean and now the Atlantic Ocean for a 24/7 warning coverage for the United States. But on the right-hand side is what people care about. They care about those benefits. And that's what you get from having a sound environmental observing system in place, starting from satellites. As you see the picture there of hurricane tracks in the East Coast on one of the satellite pictures. But health, energy, agriculture, water, and that's what people have come to the table for in Geneva. Not for these toys, they've come for the benefits. And that's what happens when you have a good organization that brings together information. What is the United States doing? We have something called the USGO. Part of it is the Integrated Ocean Observing System. And you can see some pieces out there of a system. It consists of satellites, it consists of ships that are doing surveys, it consists of buoys that are wired, and consists of cables and other types of instrumentation, floating buoys, diving buoys, and it provides information to a common shared network, comes down in many cases to NOAA's information centers, as well as going to worldwide information centers, and allows us to improve decision makers' abilities for pressing policy issues, as allowing you to know what to do in your daily life, whether you need to wear warm clothes or whether you can go on a picnic on Sunday or whatever. And coastal observing systems are particularly critical because they allow us to deal with the issues that we have here in the Puget Sound. Here's a few things that are kind of interesting from just a whiz-bang perspective. El Nino. El Nino is a Pacific phenomenon, coupled ocean-atmosphere phenomenon that affects climate and affects weather, affects drought and floods and storms pretty heavily in the Pacific, but it also correlates to weather around the world, quite frankly, and that's what it looks like from a satellite system. As you can see, the red means the heating of the water in the equatorial region. In the middle, you see the change of what's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. This determines whether the salmon are running or not. You can see the temperature of the ocean changes over years, and something we're just putting into place called a carbon tracker. And we can argue about global climate change, but quite frankly, we don't have a worldwide carbon system. So how can we really have ground truth? We want to deal with the climate. We want to argue where the carbon's coming from, where it's going, who should be mitigating it, who should pay for it, and what should happen. You need a system. So we put into place something called the carbon tracker. This allows us to take a look at what's anthropogenically created carbon and what's naturally created carbon. We've put in the last 5 years, 60 stations in the United States to measure carbon in various places where it would be critical. And you can see kind of the pattern of where you have higher carbon and lower carbon levels. But quite frankly, we don't have those stations around the world. Part of Earth observing is try to build a carbon system and understand the carbon cycle and stop arguing about the various points which can't be proven until you have the data. Innovative platforms. We want to use UAVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, satellites, and you can see even a turtle becomes an observing device. Observation systems come in all shapes and sizes. People are observers. We have cooperative weather observers who have automated stations in their backyard that contribute to our network of understanding what's going on. We have tried, you see the Predator system. We have modified a Predator. It's called the Altair, and we've tried it out for fisheries monitoring, for surveillance of weather systems coming into the West Coast. Remember, how do we look at systems that come into the West Coast? Only by satellite. We on the East Coast benefit. Every time you have a storm, we know what's coming. But you don't. See, that's the disadvantage of living out here. Now, if we had these UAVs out there along with our satellites, because we do it today with our P3s and our G4, looking at winter storms, trying to figure out what's going on specifically before it gets to the California or the Washington or the Oregon coast, this would be an enormous boon to our ability to be able to give you much more accurate forecasts of what's going on. But anyway, systems come in all sizes and packages in all types of situations. I mentioned the DART-2 buoy, and I want to mention the National Water Level Observation Stations. You call them tide gauge stations. Well, they're just not a nice thing to have. They actually help us determine around the world what is happening with tsunamis or storm waves, because as they are recorded in these water level stations, we've just recently put the 200th one in for the United States. They come in real time into central computing centers, and you can tell what's going on and get signals that help you determine what types of events, serious events, might be coming. They are part of the tsunami warning system, along with these open ocean buoys that sit in 15,000 feet of water and maybe off the coast 500 to 1,000 miles. And you can see the system there. We also tsunami evacuation routes. An observing system is not good unless it provides information, unless it's end-to-end. So figure out how to get the information to people. A couple of things that are interesting here. We have the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary. So we are protecting some of the resources off of the Olympic coast. These are the equivalent of national parks. We have 14 of them. And we only have less than 1% of our ocean area that's protected, like national parks protect lots of the natural habitat on land. The most recent ones that President Bush has signed off on the National Marine Monument for the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So this is the largest marine protected area in the world. It's larger than the Great Barrier Marine Reef Park off of Australia, and it puts aside this very pristine area for all time to maintain a place where there's 7,000 separate species, and only a quarter of them are unique to that part of the world. You see the issues with marine debris, and that's a huge issue around here. We have uncovered and destroyed or recovered and eliminated hundreds of tons of debris from this area. And anything you throw on the ground goes in the water. So wherever you are, you can be at the top of a mountain or on the beach, it's going in the water, folks. We find on Hawaii, Hawaii tends to think of themselves as the toilet bowl of the Pacific, because everything circles and ends up in Hawaii. We've taken 600 tons of debris off the northwestern Hawaiian Islands in the last 5 years. And you find lighters from Alaska, you find stuff from Japan, you find stuff from Russia, from the United States. It all ends up in our oceans, and it all ends up going on our coasts. You see some nets there that do ghost fishing, which don't help a lot. Lobster pots, all sorts of implements that we leave in the water destroy our ability to maintain those resources and have them in the future. And that's an important part of what we do here as well. Something else that we're very much interested in, ecosystem approaches to management. And an ecosystem is basically a geographical area that includes everything that's in it. Okay? We are part of the ecosystem. Humans are part of the ecosystem. And this is a picture that it talks about the Gulf of Alaska, and since we're pretty close to that, and when you come out, sail out of the Puget Sound, you can see all the factors that connect. So we are at a place where we cannot look at one thing at a time, because if you're interested in salmon and you're interested in sea lions, well, the sea lions eat the salmon. And then if you're interested in orcas, well, the orcas eat both. So now you have to protect all of them. What does that mean in ecosystem terms? How do we deal with that? And we have people in all positions on this, and I think we have to have the information, first of all, sound data that we agree on, and then deal with this from a holistic approach, and that's what that slide's meant to talk about. Puget Sound Partnership is one of the things that is a leading area, and I'm getting in locally right now. I'm just going to blitz through these for a minute. I think this is very important. You see the governor signing that into effect. It's become a state agency, basically, and it's an important piece, and Bill Ruckelshaus is going to be the first head of the advisory board on that. I think that's excellent. You see some of the other issues that you have here in the Northwest that we deal with, and we try to help the area. We try to work as a federal partner with the local and the state agencies, Puget Sound steelhead, sea lions, orcas, the International Whaling Commission. We're having a meeting in Alaska. That's a huge issue. And I'm going to keep going because I want to show you this is what we do for you in Washington. Washington, Seattle is a major center for NOAA. We have 50 offices up here. So it's enormously important to the nation what goes on here. You see we do the Alaska Fisheries Science Center here, the Northwest Fisheries Science Center that help us manage the fisheries off of this coast and all the way up to the Aleutians. The Weather Office, which is extremely important. our Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, which had developed those buoys that you see and did the work on El Nino. Pacific Marine Operations Center, our ships, half of our ships are managed from Seattle, and a number of them are here. The NOAA Diving Program is headquartered here. NOAA Diving Manual is the Bible for the government. We have over 500 qualified divers, which is the largest civilian agency that's involved in diving. So this is an enormously effective group who does observing. And finally, I'm going to stop here. The point I wanted to get across to you is these two arrows. Observe globally. If you're going to do modeling, and regional models are what count, then acting locally is what counts. And that's what you're doing here, and I appreciate that. But the system doesn't work unless you can observe locally everywhere, here, in Africa, in Antarctica, and then you can build regional models in the other direction, and you can act globally. You can bring nations together. We can talk about the facts, and we can come together, hopefully, on a better solution than we have today for many of the world's environmental problems. So this idea of observations is something I want to get across to you as fundamental. It's something we should all support, whatever political persuasion where we are in various issues. Getting the data, supporting the funding and the international cooperation to have a world global Earth observing system is critical to the future. Thank you very much.
The Admiral mentioned the NOAA website a couple of times. If you've never been there, I urge you to go to the NOAA website. There's a tremendous amount of information there. It's possible to access data from these buoys in real time, and you'll have a heck of a lot of fun even if you've never done it. I can't resist saying, when Admiral Lautenbacher was a grizzled old Sea Dog veteran, the commander of the 3rd Fleet, Bull Halsey's old job, and I was a fresh-caught baby admiral. I worked for him. I was the commander of the 3rd Fleet Logistics Force. So you might rightly wonder why now, after all these years, he looks like my younger, smarter, much better-looking brother. I don't know. Must be that Harvard education. That brings us to this week's pretty good rule, which doesn't have the pizzazz and the sizzle of some of my earlier rules, but when I went through the rules, it was so important I couldn't leave it off the list. Don't gossip or speak ill of others. See you next week. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from Enterprise Seattle. For over 35 years, Enterprise Seattle has provided client-based economic development services to businesses throughout King County and its 39 cities. More information on Enterprise Seattle and how they help businesses grow and prosper can be found at www.enterpriseseattle.org. And by First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.